So also followed up by Mary from Holochain. We've got Garrett from CoinDesk, Paul from Keyko, and Sandi from Calimero. So do proper introductions in a second, but welcome to the stage. And thanks everyone for joining us. So I guess just to do really quick introductions and explain why Evan looks extremely different to her picture that was up before. So just to start, so hi, I'm Fraser Edwards from Checked. We're building payments infrastructure for decentralized ID, for credentials, verified data, that kind of jazz, and also decentralized reputation, which we may touch on later on. Then directly to my left, we've got Mary, so Executive Director of the Holochain Foundation, building open source infrastructure for distributed and collaborative web, and serial tech founder, seed investor, startup mentor, general badass. Yeah. Then we've got Paul, so CEO of Keyko, Web3 engineering studio, working with clients on foundation and product all the way through the entire life cycle, and founded back in 2019 and working across kind of financial services and well beyond. Then we have Evan's stand-in. So unfortunately she couldn't make it due to personal reasons, but thank you to Garrett Skrovina from CoinDesk for stepping in. Head of strategic partnerships for CoinDesk, business strategist and partnerships expert focused on building sustainable audiences and creative experiences utilizing Web3. And finally, but not least, so Sandi Fatic from Calimero, building sharding infrastructure to allow businesses to protect data and privacy whilst leveraging public blockchains. And again, serious entrepreneur and also has worked at Near, Facebook and Google, amongst others. So very solid engineering chops. So if everyone could give a round of applause for all of our panelists, and then we'll get started. Okay, thank you. So to get started, obviously the title of this reference is kind of verified data. So rapid fire in whoever wants to start and then start arguing with each other. Verifiable data in one sentence. What is it? And one example relevant to your organization, if you can, please.
My first, okay. Well, relevant to our organization, verifiable data means something that comes with provenance, something that is signed by individuals or a verified node that it can be, can move through a flow of information to someone else in a different context and still kind of be able to come back to it and know where it's from, who did it, and why. And the context part is super important to us. So verifiable data, in a nutshell, is signed data that is traceable. Simplified, but hey, it's a way to get started.
Anyone have a different view, disagree with that, or just a different example?
Simpler or different, yeah. I see verifiable data as data where I can trust the source, a source of authenticity, or a trusted source where I know where it's come from. And like Mary said, then obviously the traceability and being able to take data back to its origins and validate that origin. And in terms of a use case, if I was looking for financial data related to some kind of historic data from a marketplace, I'd want to know that the trusted source is a financial institution of worthiness. So that would be an example of where I'd look for verifiable data.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with both of you guys. I think to build on that, a verifiable piece of data is, one way to look at it is kind of like a Web3 cookie, right? You're surfing the web, like there's certain data that's transmitted from a browser to a website and back and forth. A decentralized piece of data is just that across decentralized applications, blockchains, etc.
Cool. I mean, not much to add, data which can be cryptographically verified. I mean, used everywhere, wallets, all the blockchain networks, everywhere. Even before that, we used verifiable data for many, many years before that, so.
And any example from Calimero Network, specific to you guys?
The whole thing is, we have a settlement layer which uses cryptography to prove that, signatures have been verified in validators, wallets have, every peer-to-peer transaction is verified again by cryptographic proof. So, it's
cool.
I think we can dive into, more specific things than just.
Well, one of the things that I'll say is just different on it. So Holochain isn't a blockchain. So Holochain doesn't work quite the same way that a lot of data in the blockchain does. There's not a central chain that's holding everything. Every application is its own holochain, and that's an application. So verification and validity happens within that context. And so for us, it starts with sort of like the individual or the node actually signing data into a local source that can then get shared into a distributed hash that gets basically validated by the peers. And the thing is that it's about reason we're doing it this way is because we think we need more modular systems that can talk to one another so that data flows can happen in different ways and different needs can be accomplished. So it's, for instance, in a supply chain, the first part of verifiable data is the producer who's producing something has to be able to put something in, and you want provenance, you may want to know GPS information, you may want to have photos, you may want to have a bunch of things that would be really costly on-chain, but you need them to still be signed by keys and be verifiable in lots of different ways. They may go through other verifications, other people who would put, you were talking earlier about, what was the first thing that you said that we'll get to later? Sorry, it was really interesting.
Oh, decentralized reputation.
Yeah,
maybe.
decentralized reputation. Well, all that is like who actually can say something about that data that gives it even more trust, right? That's a lot what you're doing, whether you're talking about it in an individual's reputation or the process of a flow of a piece of, I don't know, coffee or something going through a supply chain. So
then I guess to nicely kind of segue on, where do you think the most valuable kind of verified data is at the moment, or where do you think it will be? Is it that supply chain example? It's personally one of our theses is that's one of the biggest examples, just because personal data on an individual data is, as insulting as this might be to individuals, not worth that much individually. Someone did an experiment, I think a couple of years ago on the BBC. They tried to sell all of their data individually. They made the sum total of, I think, a tenner. And it was literally everything about them. So in aggregate, huge business, individually not worth that much. A company profile or supply chain may be worth a bit more, but I don't know if either of you have a different viewpoint on where that valuable data is. Or feel free to disagree with me about that personal data point.
Well, I think there's value in that when it comes to raising the integrity and the just generally realizing that the participants in the Web3 space, they're real people. There's a level of what you need to know in terms of anonymity all the way up to full disclosure. But I think when you're trying to raise the quality and try and raise, how people can actually validate participants within Web3, I think it's important that you have some verifiable data that maps back to an individual, even if you don't disclose everything about them. Yeah. Sticking to some of the core, properties of Web3.
Well, I think on that point, I think data is very valuable to, say, businesses, entities, corporations, et cetera. But at an individual level, very few people value their data in a way that's significant enough to them, right? Like, we've given up our data and given up our privacy in many ways to access certain digital services, online applications, et cetera. So it's kind of certainly devalued at an individual level, data about yourself, et cetera. Where there is value is at a more company-specific level whenever you're trying to target certain people, target certain users, and try to obtain customers.
Anything you got? I mean, from my perspective, the biggest thing is payments right now. That's a use case which has been proven. Every single transactions on every single blockchain out there uses payments. And that every block can be verified, every payment can be verified, and you are the holder of your private key. And I think right now we see on-ramps, we see MasterCard adopting it, we see payments on Bitcoin, hedge funds, DeFi. And right now that seems like the biggest use case out there for sure. The question is what's gonna come after that, data ownership and other things, and there's gonna be many other things coming afterwards.
I just want to actually say something in opposition to what you're saying about the individual data. We've been giving it up and it doesn't matter anymore. I think actually the tides have been turning on that, and what we've been seeing over the last 5 years or so is the beginnings of people saying, no, that's actually not okay. We've seen legislation come up around privacy. It's new, it's continuing to grow. And I don't think it's so much just because we want everything to be private or whatnot. I think sometimes we do the policy a bit wrong at first because we don't know how to understand it. But I think that's emanating from this idea of that there is something being taken that we didn't know that we were giving, and that we want that to change. And so until we have the infrastructure for that to change, it's really difficult to push up against and say, well, we have to do it differently, or we have to expect the businesses to do it differently. So to me, part of what we're doing in the Web3 world is playing with that infrastructure, coming up with new ways that it can be built so that we can give back to the people the things that they are saying is important. Because whether or not I share some of it is what's important to me. Who gets to see it and use it, that's important to me.
Totally, and I agree with you there. I was more looking back at like traditionally that's how it's developed and how this space was, and you're absolutely right that there wasn't tools for an alternative, certainly at an individual level, to own your data and decide who gets it or not, right? Like my analogy earlier to like cookies, right? Cookies across the internet, most people didn't really realize what they were giving up. You just hit accept and just keep going, right? Like, and most of the time you don't notice a different experience whether you accept or deny a cookie. That's a problem, right? Like you should give your data up and it should provide you a more personalized, better experience. It should better serve you as a product. And that's what this can enable, once more applications and more things are enabled with it.
And we're not there yet. And everybody wants it to be convenient too. So we're going to have some adoption concerns with some of that.
And totally agree. And I think for anyone who isn't already aware, across Europe you have EIDAS coming through, which is basically legislation and kind of regulations to implement an EU-wide ID, but it's using kind of decentralized self-sovereign ID where that kind of ownership is with the individual, or not, maybe not ownership, but control. And I think that's been one of the interesting shifts is maybe a way, if you look into the SSI decentralized ID world, is it's maybe shifting away from complete ownership more into control. And I think you used the word like the value is in being able to share the data. And personally, like our company's found that the language to people that lands the best, I don't know if anyone else has found the same, is portability, the ability to move that data to wherever you want it to. And there's like an intrinsic privacy bit there, but that's not the bit people land on. It's like, I want to be able to take my social graph out of Twitter and somewhere else and it instantly works. Like,
And now it's even worse.
Yeah.
Every single transaction you post on Ethereum is public. Every single transactions you make on any other chain, it's public. Yeah. So like it's not you're giving your data to Facebook, now you're giving it to the whole world. And the question is like, how do you solve that? Like, I think that's the real question, how do you solve it? Because like we're preaching Web3 decentralization and privacy, and like every single transactions you ever made ever is visible on chain.
That's one of the things where you need to start looking at different technologies that are not all a public blockchain. The public blockchain needs certain uses. Exactly.
That's why I'm mentioning it. Like.
Exactly. I think.
In public blockchains, right? Like you can tell from a wallet what it is, but how do you identify who's behind that wallet, right? Like that's a huge issue here today, where like there's only so much that you can glean from looking at a public blockchain and make assumptions.
That's true.
Even a company like Chainalysis, right? They use a model that's algorithmic that's being challenged in court today that's not proven to be held up. It's being used by a lot of regulators to be held up, but we don't know that that's actually 100% proof, verifiable, et cetera.
Yeah, it just takes one, like you to go to a front end, any front end, you sign with your wallet, they take a cookie snapshot of what you did, they take your IP address, they can fingerprint you very well. Like, believe me, like governments use it to track funds. You know, Tornado Cash happened because they knew which wallets were Korean wallets which were hacked. They knew which were terrorist funded wallets. Like, it's very, very easy to see who owns a wallet. Like, you'll be surprised. Like, you'll be surprised.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm saying it's still predictive. Right? Even at 99% accuracy, 98, it's a predictive model. There's no registry, there's no central authority that, you know, is by the community, but it's a predictive tool. It's a predictive tool though. It's not a registry necessarily.
Yeah, but like it's
you have, say, ENS, where someone has directly linked their address, which is how loads of celebrities ended up with tainted Tornado Cash because they were daft enough or wanted to. Whichever side of that you are.
ICOs with KYCs.
Yeah, exactly.
You couldn't buy an ICO in many cases if you didn't have KYC. Like they track you down, see your wallet every time you made an investment.
There's a great, I think it was a great quote or a great analogy of this from Tor from Secret Network. And he basically was like, if you're using a public ledger for certain transactions, you are basically walking around in the street with your clothes off. And that's your current state. You're just not really think of it in that way. Like everything is exposed about what you're doing if someone knows your identity. Which I think is we've almost got ourselves onto a topic which we're going to touch on later on, but we probably bring it forward because this was really related to this, which is in terms of, in some cases you've got data on Ledger, you've got people verifying things through that way. You were mentioning kind of payments. You then have, say, credentials or other data off Ledger, all of which verified. I guess, how do each of you look against, I guess to extend this kind of, I just came from Cosmoverse, and there were two kind of themes if I compare that against Mainnet. So Mainnet in New York, there was a big focus on just abstract away all of the data, all the blockchains underneath. No one should see anything. It should just be seamless user experience and products. Cosmos, you had all these DeFi projects being like, we need to be able to get people all the way down to the ledger very, very quickly and seamlessly. I guess with kind of where you're working, do either of you, or do any of you have a strong position on like where in that user experience you want to be? You want to bring everyone all the way down, or you want to make it invisible?
You know, I don't think that most people want to be looking at ledgers. I mean, Holochain's not here to do more financial transactions. We're not necessarily just in the payment space. We're a generalizable infrastructure that can be used for any kind of application that people are collaborating on, but that you want some form of like verified. You want to verify who the people in the membrane are that you're sharing it out to. You want to have it be more owned by the individuals. You want to have it not necessarily be hosted on large tech infrastructure. People host everything themselves because an app can just live on the devices. So from our perspective, with what we're doing, it's not about can you see everything. You make visible what's contextually relevant to people. That's what they want. They don't need to see every little piece. Can they? Sure. But who does? Really, how many people are first of all, competent to assess whether the smart contract that they're using is sufficiently good enough, who's competent enough to understand all of the things that they're looking at. Most of the users that I speak to, they don't care about that. They want a good UI, they want it very usable, and they're really looking for, does this actually meet my needs? And if my needs are, I don't want to pay a lot of money for it, or I want to have a fantastic user experience that's social, or I want to be able to collaborate just with this group of people, and I don't even want it out there in the world in a public way. That's what they care about. So that's what they need.
I think before I open it up, just almost an analogy is how many people read T's and C's. It will take you far too long. You're not going to get any useful experience of it. And a project I was running previously, which was doing SSI for international travel, the designers came up with basically 3 layers of consent. There was consent where you're just, okay, I'm not going to read this, I'm just going to consent. There was okay, I need an idiot's guide to what I'm agreeing to and the data I'm sharing. And then there was a full legal T's and C's if you went down. And no one ever got to the 3rd screen. No one ever bothered getting that far because the information was irrelevant to them. Yeah. So anyone else have different views in terms of surfacing or going further down, exposing kind of more transactional level data or, yeah.
I think I would just add that account abstraction is kind of important in that regard, right? I think the user experience for them to care about their data, right? It needs to be abstracted away, but also, provide a personalized experience or a better experience in general. I think the ENS example is a good thing, right? There's a lot of applications, et cetera, where you sign in with a wallet, and if that wallet is registered with an ENS, what populates? Well, your ENS does, right? That's an identifier of some sort, right? That's a very basic example, but if you have more preferences built into, shout out to Disco, which is kind of a data backpack that sits in between a wallet and an application, right? And that data backpack can, contain your preferences, more personal information, et cetera. And you as a user should sign something just like you sign a cookie with a website, where you hold that data yourself, you custody it, and you are allowing this website to serve you a more personal experience in that way. But after that, yes or no, granting, everything else should be abstracted away. I don't believe that a user wants to see that. They can, to your point, and they should be able to. You should always give access to see that, but I don't think that the majority of people care enough in the same way that your TNC example.
And I think something else, I can see James in the audience. So James from Evening, who used to work at SSI, well, still works at SSI, but at DOC. And so I know something that Evening was looking way back in the day, I think, was the idea of smart agents. So in the way of abstracting away the UI or the details of what data you're managing and where it's going, actually the ability to delegate that onto an agent or an AI that operates on your behalf and therefore shares different data with different organizations depending on your preferences or learned behavior. So as an example, anyone who's signed up to the Wi-Fi here or like in an airport probably isn't giving their real email, I hope isn't giving their real email address or real name, that kind of detail. But if you're with your bank, you need to. And you need to do both of those. So I totally agree. I think that's where it ultimately needs to go to, because I think there's maybe an open question to bring out. It's like, how do you see people are going to manage all of that data if they're in control of it? Because right now it's just off there in the ether in some company's database. But if it becomes under your control, it becomes almost unmanageable. I guess in the same way that people are starting to use password managers, but this would be in a drastically bigger way. I don't know if there are any strong opinions on how it's going to look and how it's going to feel in the future.
That's going to be a complex thing that's going to be handled, I think, by a lot of different organizations that are really thinking about user experience. Because at the end of the day, this is just massive user experience problems. In the same way that like passwords are still a problem, and like the way we're talking about keys versus passwords, well, key management we haven't completely solved either for some of the Web3 adoption issues, because we need to be able to easily revoke the keys, replace the keys at times, from the user perspective, I think. We have it,
Near
but
has
not
fast auth MPC.
Yep, but
Near
how-
was one of the first to implement a counter section. We are the pioneer who implemented that. Meta transaction, nobody talks about. I mean, users should not pay for gas fees. Users should log in with your social. MPC generates a key which you can recover. You don't pay gas fees, somebody else pays. You don't pay for servers right now. Like no user thinks about how much Facebook pays for their service. And I think Web3 should be the same. You log in, you get an MPC key, you can recover it socially. Meta transaction, the developer pays for transactions and monetize it somehow differently, or you just pay a subscription. And I mean, that like a counter section has been implemented in Near since we launched like 4 years ago. So like it's really important to have like multi-sigs, function access keys, so you can give different keys access. And I think it's already here. I would very much disagree. I think like user experience-wise, you can build good applications on blockchains right now. Problem-wise, use case, like what are the use cases actually people want to use, that's a different question. Like I really focus on like solving privacy and building applications which people want to use. Like I don't think scalability, infrastructure is as much of a problem. Like you can get million users on Near and run it, but like where are the apps, you know, like Near has few, but like we also same, like, you know, I think it's like not becoming a problem anymore in my view.
I completely agree. I think a lot of the conferences over the last, I don't know, year, especially like Token 2049 and others, have been dominated by like roll-ups and ZK roll-ups, like ECC certainly and others. I don't think that's the problem. I don't know if anyone else would disagree with that. I completely agree with you. Like there's easily enough block space, enough capacity. Like it's actually applications that people that are usable, that abstract all this away, that I think it's needed.
Yeah, I mean, you can build on an alternate layer one. And like if you had really, like that's the question I ask. If you had a cloud provider which charges you $10 million a year, and you had an alternate cloud provider which doesn't change anything for your business, and it charges you $1 million per year, in any other business you would automatically switch. This cloud provider is cheaper for me, provides me the same functionality, it's faster. But people don't. And that's the problem, because like we live in a bubble still, in my view. There's like application coming out, like loyalty is becoming a big thing. Yeah. Tokenization of real estate assets, Bitcoin ETFs, like there's many more things happening. But the question is like, I mean, what's the real use cases people want to use? You know, like I work in the data ownership, like we're also a peer-to-peer network with settlement and stuff. And the question is like, do people care about privacy? Like, okay, I tell you, I go to Web3 companies and I ask them, do you care about your data? And they say yes. And I ask them, what software as a service do you use? I use Slack. So why are you using Slack? Why are you not on Calimero running a peer-to-peer Web3 chat? Or like, why are you using Atlassian and Jira? Why are you not on a self-hosted version of it? And that's the question we have to solve. Like that's, you know, probably is going to take time, some data leaks from OpenAI, some data leaks of Facebook or whatever. But yeah.
I'll push back there a bit. Like, do you feel that the reason they don't care is because their users do not care?
Of course.
Right. So I mean, I think like Right, comes down back to user experience, and I think you need to...
User experience is the same. I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
There's
Well, I think you need to meet people where they already are. The applications they are already using every day, right? Like that's why you've started to see this kind of have a little bit more use case in, let's say, Web3 or decentralized social, as opposed to other spaces, right? That's where those identifiers and things are important. I think people do want to take their networks with them and use that across different applications so it better serves them, right? You're starting to see that. You know, it's not there yet, but it's certainly one of the applications that, you know, has some small level of traction.
Yeah, we had a really strange experience of that with Creds, where we're building decentralized reputation, and we tried to meet users where they were, which we thought was Discord and Telegram. So we made those like the default logins to come into Creds. When we were going through that journey, people were like, we want Google sign in. And we're like, aren't you people like privacy focused? And this is like the devil? And they're like, no, it's just easier. It's just way easier to sign in. I just want to use it. And also the other side of it is they see it as the least valuable part of their identity is their email address, it seems. It's just they sign up for newsletters, they don't care about it, and they're willing to use it to sign into all sorts. Then they'll add other connectors in. But there's a really interesting part where they couldn't care less about like, yeah, where we thought we were being like really kind of focusing on the community. We're like, no, this is a headache for us. We don't want to be doing it.
If you had the social login, where you log in with Google and it creates a world for you, like do you think that would change? Because there is solutions which provide you social logins, which create an MPC wallet for you.
I guess for us, all the data's off ledger, so they don't need an account at all. So for us, we never need to use it's just, we use storage, so we use decentralized storage, but there's never an account creation. You just log in, the data's yours, you keep it. But as a result, no one really, I think that's the other part, and I think this is a big shift over the last year, was last year, I think everyone was, if you're a user, you were expected to pay for services, and the benefit was going to be you get ownership, control, and privacy. And I think what we're finding now is actually users won't pay, so it'll be very similar to kind of the model that we have now, but then they still expect kind of portability, privacy, and control. I don't know if anyone disagrees with that, but it feels like the commercial model has shifted. It's individuals shouldn't be paying for this stuff anymore, or not expected to anyway.
Interesting. I think it's been there all along.
Interesting.
I mean, that to me, that's the fundamental adoption difference between it. I think it's one thing to talk about a lot of things that have moved in the payments area or in the finance space when people are doing prospecting and it's all about money at some level and trying to make money. But when you talk about it in the social spaces, I don't think there's been a massive shift. I think there's been always a conversation of we don't want this thing, but we get so much convenience from it that we're almost willing to do anything. With it. It's like, but we'll move away from it a little bit. I think what you said was really interesting. They care about it less. It seems to me that's just the same thing that happened with Yahoo, right? At one time, people had Yahoo accounts that mattered to them, but then Yahoo became the login or the email address that you used for all your junk that you didn't want in, you weren't going to read anymore because you'd already moved to a different service provider. People are moving on. They might be even moving on to a more privacy-focused email account. But they haven't left behind their Google account. That's the easy one that, well, it's been there forever, it doesn't matter, and it's like free data. Like, or they're not charging me for like terabytes of data, so who cares how much goes into that account? That's
true. So then shifts of tack, because we're starting to run out of time. What's the most fun or expected use of verifiable data you've seen in the past year or are expecting next year? Fun or I guess interesting, unusual? And I guess to kick this off while you're thinking, because this is
I think it was interesting. I saw something recently where an AI service is starting to use non-public verifiable data to feed the results that it gives. So going beyond like the thing you get out of a ChatGPT at the moment, this was starting to ingest verifiable data. Obviously, it had been given permission to access, but it adds a new level of quality in the results that it was producing to the person interacting with it.
I spoke to a company yesterday, Cosmoverse, doing exactly that. They were starting to ingest their own information to ChatGPT because they wanted it to be from verified sources internally because they couldn't trust everything else that was out there.
And that's a whole new dimension. You look, they saturated all the public. It's just like, my old world, it's like spiders that trawled the internet in the 90s or the, they indexed the whole of the internet. these engines have gone out, they've consumed all the public data, they're all going to be on a level playing field. Unless one of them has access to data, the others don't, there's no edge. So that's an interesting opportunity.
That's theoretically the reason why Twitter's APIs went behind a massive paywall with a hefty chunk of fees behind them was, it was just getting it. Exactly. Just, I guess, to see that as well, one that I've not seen yet but heard of is using kind of verifiable data, and mostly for avatars in the metaverse, especially around company metaverses and addresses by C-suite individuals. Basically on the idea that if you have an avatar and you can fake pretty much everything about it, from the appearance to the way it sounds to the way it speaks, suddenly you could impersonate someone perfectly in a different realm. So now they're looking at how do you verify all of these pieces together, because otherwise you can have really, really I mean, if Mark Zuckerberg doing an address in his metaverse, doing maybe company results, and someone manages to spoof that, it's suddenly a very, very dangerous thing. So I think that's one of the most, for me, one of the more unusual ones that I've seen so far that apparently is going to see some takeoff from who I'm speaking to.
Yeah, I think we haven't even seen some of the necessary things around identity yet. I think we've moved forward a lot with some of the self-sovereign identity aspects, but not nearly enough. And I think what you were talking about around the social graphs and seeing more apps that come out that are able to really capture it and know. I mean, it's not just even in the metaverse, and it's not just even, like when we're using avatars, they're talking human beings, videos, pictures, like we can deepfake everything. It's awful. And it does happen, and it happens in the middle of business negotiations sometimes where somebody gets in the middle. I mean, we've had it happen with our own organization on large deals, and you have to be so careful. And what kinds of tooling will be coming out over the coming years that are really using all of these different aspects of verifiable data to help know for certain when you're speaking to somebody or not. I think that's going to be critical.
Yeah. I mean, I think just to add to that, I think like the most fun and interesting thing that we're seeing today is like the social login, right? Logging in with Google, logging in with Twitter, those things. Like some of those applications you're seeing today are instantly spinning up a wallet as soon as you sign in. So it's immediately attaching, a communication channel to a wallet. And we all know as a wallet, you can provide financial incentives, you could put in tokens that have data attached to them, et cetera. It's kind of a bucket that's instantly created based on a social login, based on an email, based on a phone number. Like, to me, that's the first primitive that we're starting to see that could encapsulate a lot more information.
Seems to me, though, until we get to a point where wallets can, like, you can have some control of accepting what's coming into that wallet, to me, it's a problem. That's like one of the things about the way that we're doing some of those or some of the design for currencies is that you have control where you have countersigning on these things to accept, because that's a big problem.
Agreed. I'm just saying this is the first step in that direction, right? Because like then you have like, smart contract enabled wallets where you're kind of giving permissions and things like that. And, there certainly seems, whether it's like a Holo or Disco or others, there needs to be an intermediary there where you can control the permissions, right? And that's what, like, I think everyone on the stage is interested in hoping to see, at some point, because it provides better experiences and it ultimately provides more, let's say, white space for like blockchains to enable certain applications that people use widely across society.
Just before I hand over to Sandi for a final point, I think Evan always gives a really good example that really speaks to your point, which is, so Evan McMullen from Disco, who you've replaced. So she always gives a really good example of kind of if you use SBTs for data, so soulbound tokens, so an NFT that receives into your account that you basically can't get rid of or is very hard to get rid of. The example she gives is, what if your degree was an SBT, but it came from a college that is, say, predominantly of a certain, like, I guess, nationality or certain income class in the US? That suddenly is public data that's on Ledger that anyone can discover that can be used to profile you. And you have no control over that. Once it's there and you can't get rid of it. And I think that really speaks to your point of, that's the danger of that data being on Ledger if you get it wrong, is it really can open you up.
Well, and that's why it's important that there's an intermediary, right, that has like a data backpack like Disco has, where like you can control those permissions, right? You don't want a university or some organization like that issuing a soulbound token to a wallet address that, to your point, is exposing you And anyone, it's on a public blockchain. Anyone can go use that information, right? You need it, be like, no, I want it issued to this wallet through this protocol, right? That kind of intermediates it and allows permissions and things like that.
Sandi, anything you want to add? Oh, you got in a completely different area. So the original question to you.
Yeah, like I think like one of the things, I mean, it was all said, but I think it's also like, you know, like an interesting use case. I think like the intersection of AI and blockchain will be very interesting because, you know, we had fake media, fake news, all of this stuff happening, and just like with AI, it's going to be much more prominent and visible. And like one of good provenance question is like, you know, was this generated by this company? Was this generated by AI? And like these kind of things are going to be, you know, an interesting intersection, I think, coming up, especially with OpenAI and the elections and all of this happening.
Yeah, I was going to say, the US elections next year is going to be fascinating for exactly that reason.
So I think that's going to be, you know, one of good things. Like one interesting thing is like a project which I've seen recently is essentially building an open web data set. So like you can build competitors and models to like OpenAI. Essentially what the project does, they post data on-chain and they have like a mechanical Turk where you label the data, you get paid. So essentially like anybody in the world can just, you know, start working, labeling the data and get, you know, some money. And I think like gig economy is going to be something very interesting because like, you know, we haven't seen, you know, decentralized Uber, decentralized apps, you know, like a project building on Calimero is building parcel chain. So it's essentially a community driven delivery system. Like I know I'm going from this floor to there, I put my parcel, somebody picks it up, you have a reputation system. And I think like these things are going to be more and more interesting. And like also dangerous, like that's something which, you know, blockchains are dangerous as well. So like the question will be like, how do you prevent fraud? How do you prevent somebody dropping you something you don't want? And I mean, obviously all the stuff on the dark internet you don't want to see. Like once you post it, you cannot ever remove it, so.
So we're coming up on time, so I think just across the panel, any final thoughts that anyone wants to leave us with? And then I think, unfortunately, no time for questions, but we'll have to make a move. So any final thoughts or any final statements or kind of shameless shilling that anyone wants to be doing just before we wrap up?
No, but just in your other question about interesting things, the place I keep going to is like the bio data and medical data, things like that irritate me the most in my life is not being able to take my own medical records from one place to another. And I know here in Europe it's a very different experience, but in the US everything is, you know, privately done and awful. And just to never feel like you're in control of the things that are all about you, that's the place. That's one place where I want verifiable data and personal ownership of that data to change.
Anyone else with anything else?
Ownership and portability. That's what I think ultimately you want with your data.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, just echo that. I think you should care about your, you know, identity and data on digital spaces, physical spaces, and how it's, you know, transported across various entities in general. You should care.
Yeah, completely agree. Okay, well with that thought, thanks everyone for their time and thanks for paying attention and thanks to the panel for this great panel. So thank you. Great.